How would you like to spend some time with music that can reconfigure what you think about yourself, about music, and about space and time?
Welcome to the Sum of All Wisdom. My guest today is Matthijs Kouw, an experimental composer from the Netherlands, whose work explores the relationship between movement and stasis, emergence and structure, noise and meaning. And we'll start with music by Matthijs, music that's like architecture and atmosphere, a space you inhabit. Sound that doesn't ask us to listen, but to reconsider what listening actually means. In the conversation ahead, we'll talk about drone music and physical music, philosophy, and the possibility that sound can take us beyond language itself. It's a deep and fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Underneath it all is sort of a question that's driving this as an engine. And that question is, what happens when music begins to change the way we perceive time and ourself? This is the Sum of All Wisdom. I'm Scott Cady, and let's get into Irradiance by Matthijs Kouw and Gogi Petrovic from the album Recalcitrance. Irradiance from the album Recalcitrance by Matthijs Kouw and Gagi Petrovic. Some forms of music ask you to sing along, and some ask you to dance. Some might ask you to remember. There's a number of ways that music enters us and lives with us. But there's another kind of music entirely, and that is music that asks you to listen differently, not for melody or lyrics, but for texture and space and emergence and indwelling. It's a sublime experience of becoming aware of your own awareness while sound unfolds around you. That's the music that my guest today produces. Matthijs Kouw is a Dutch experimental composer and sound artist, a musician whose work lives somewhere between drone music, philosophy, architecture, and meditation. In this conversation, we'll talk about experimental music not as a genre, but as a process of exploration. So let's get right to it. To get into things, Matthijs, what I'd love to sort of start with is a little bit of an introduction, right? So first of all, let me explain the podcast a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom, I call it the sum of all wisdom because for me, music is the sum of all wisdom. This is a sort of mantra that I've had all my life because I believe that music gives us things that no other art form can give us. And whether it's with words or without words, it does something in a language that I think is universal in that sense. And so it's very humanist, and it conveys something to everybody, even when it's challenging or confusing or sort of not familiar. I think it brings us something. It gives us the ability to do something with our minds and our experience and ourself that other art forms don't allow, and just sort of regular day-to-day conversation often don't allow either. So the idea is that there are many paths to wisdom for me, and music takes us down those paths. And when we walk together on these paths, we approach something like wisdom. And collectively, if we add it all together, right, that's the sum that I'm talking about, the sum of all wisdom. So I think for me, your music, the art that you create it offers me something that a lot of other, let's say, genres of music don't offer. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, and get into some of the details of what you as a composer, as a creator, want to do for listeners and for yourself, but also what that does for me as a listener. So anyway, that's sort of where we're coming from.
Fantastic.
And so I'd love to start with a little bit of an introduction for you to tell us about who you are. So you position yourself on your Bandcamp site, for instance, as an experimental musician exploring the relationship between movement and stasis, which I think on its own is really interesting, right? How does a soundscape do those things for you? But let's start with quote unquote experimental music and what that means. So as a label, it seems to me it does some pretty heavy lifting, right? We've got Charles Ives in that context. We've got Pierre Schaeffer, Brian Eno, James Taylor. There's so many folks who are categorized in that sense as experimental. So for me, when I see that breadth of interestingness, right, it really means this is more of a position than a genre for me. So what I'd like to hear you tell us is, what does experimental mean for you?
That's a big question. Yeah. No, I love it. So there are different perspectives I could give in maybe a vain attempt to answer the question, but let's take the experiment, so the act of experimentation as a starting point. For me, it is very much exactly that. So it is. Maybe it starts with an idea. Maybe it starts with playing around with a new instrument that I just got, but the experimentation, kind of approaching things with a beginner's mindset, if you will. For me, that's really helpful to really dive into things, to start things out. So there's a certain, I suppose, leveling the playing field gesture in there, if that makes sense. So we can all be musicians. We can all try to create something, and it doesn't need to be very elaborate or difficult. And especially in the last couple of decades, we've seen this, the fact that a lot of these tools are becoming a commodity. I think that this is a great thing, right? So this is fantastic. Now all of us can spend a couple of euros and start making music and start releasing music. I think that's fantastic. So that's maybe one answer, like the doing the experiments, and And then experimental as a label. So I don't take any genres for granted. I see them as starting points to start thinking about how we can categorize sound and how we can categorize the experience of sound and the experience of making music. So for me, experimental opens up this whole width of different perspectives. Yeah, so that's probably how I would answer your question. But it's a big one, yeah.
It seems like a big one. There's a lot going on in sort of quote unquote experimental music, as I sort of said. But thanks for that. I like the experimental in the sense of experiments, right? Experimenting with sound and where that takes you. So you and I have known each other for almost 2 decades now, right? We met in about 2009 doing academic stuff, very different from where both of us are now.
Different life, yeah.
Totally different lives, right? So, but in that time, I think the first thing I heard of when we, let me not get ahead of myself. When we first met, we were talking about the music that you were doing even back then. And I think the first album of yours I heard was Transductions, right? From early in the 2000s. And from there, I followed your progression through your work with Men's, and you've had a number of collaborators over the years. And I'd really love to hear about it. For me, I feel, I guess, the development of what you produce and the influence of the folks that you're working with. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your own sense of the evolution of what you do.
That's a great question. So in some sense, I find myself doing the same things over and over again. But there is a certain evolution in there. And I remember in the chat we had before this recording that we were talking about, okay, what's kind of your history with music? How did you end up in this scene listening to this music? So in an attempt to give some sense of where did this all come from and where is it going, I'm not sure. There is this sort of insatiable hunger to listen to music, to explore music. Where can it go? And of course, there is a certain preference that I have in the things that I listen to and the things that I create. So perhaps that is sort of the driving force, the true will, if you will, behind this. And I'm not really sure how to articulate that, but I think that's part of the mystery, part of the fun, that there is this certain drive towards something, although I can't really explain it quite well. I was thinking about all kinds of smart deconstructivist remarks to make about our chat, because it's essentially it's also a bit of a biography or autobiography. And there was a time when I didn't really do that. I was like, okay, people want to interview me about my music. I think that's really weird. But of course, you can't really escape, giving some biography. Even silence is a form of biography. So. Insert favorite Jacques Derrida quote here. I don't know, but I'm happy with the chat. But where is it all going? I really don't know. I started listening to music with a big preference for the more extremer side of things. So I listened to a lot of metal, grindcore. The louder the better. At some point, discovered noise. So of course. Masami Akita, Merzbau, and then through my various visits to record stores in Amsterdam, back when there were still record stores. There are now just a handful of them, but people are still persisting, which I love, of course. But there were many, many more back in the 90s, because that's kind of the era we're talking about. And I would make this round that would take me about maybe half a day along multiple record stores, and each of them would have some representation of the outer fringes. And at some point, people start referring me to someone who was doing this mail order company called Phosphor back in Amsterdam back in the day. And I did simply phone them up because he had a website, but I just called him and I was like, okay, I hear you're selling interesting music, and can I drop by? And he was like, so Paul is his name. He was like, yeah, sure, come on over. So I went to his place, listened to a lot of music, and bought a lot of music at the spot. So so it was kind of a gateway into even more experimental stuff. And then at some point, I became involved with the people from Staalplaat, which is a record store and label also based in Amsterdam back then. Who were doing a lot of weird stuff like noise, contemporary classical, also some rhythmic stuff like industrial, but also techno, more experimental kinds of techno.
Mm.
And I just got really into it. I started doing their radio show every Tuesday night on Amsterdam pirate radio station Radio 100, which was a perfect excuse to go through all the new releases and bring some of them to the studio and start mixing things. And at some point became involved with making music myself. So I had a computer, had some external gear, and started playing around basically. And where all of this is going, I'm not really sure. Some people say that sometimes you find people making the music they don't really have themselves, but would like to listen to. So maybe also that applies to writers. You're writing the book that you can't find on your shelves. I'm not sure if it's that deliberate. For me, it's just something that comes into existence. So I start playing around. I start experimenting, if you will, and then stuff happens. And at some point, you have to say, okay, this is starting to sound like something. I kind of like it. It's time to finish it or release it or whatever. And this process can take many, many years. So sometimes I make something, I put it away for, well, up to years, and I rediscover it and I start playing around with it, and then it gets finished in a few weeks. So it's very indeterminate, very unpredictable.
Mm. Indeterminacy seems to be kind of a thing for experimental music. Wherever on the spectrum that you've sort of depicted, wherever you fall in there, indeterminacy seems to be an important part of the soundscape, right?
That's another great question. So I find that a lot of the stuff that I do is almost architectural. So it's like creating spaces for people to dwell in. And in my collaboration with Phil McGuire, who is a dear friend of mine, who I really met through music online, which was great. But he's a very dear friend of mine, and I like his work a lot. I really feel privileged to be working with him. But with Phil, this architectural metaphor became very explicit. So we were basically creating these spaces for people to dwell into, to listen, to spend some time in, and that works quite well. And a lot of it is quite indeterminate. So I lay out these compositions. I do all the mixing manually, so there's not a lot of automation going on there. But yeah, even still, when I listen back to some of the pieces that I made, they surprise me. It's not something I can really control. Because of all the layered, the different layers interacting. So I think it's quite indeterminate in that sense.
Your latest release is called Transversal, and I was listening to that as, for prep for the conversation today. And asymptotic stands out for me, especially on that record. I think, first of all, the whole record itself, I think, is really wonderful. And it does.
Thank you.
Why I think it's wonderful is, for me, it offers, as you getting to the indeterminacy, it offers me as a listener a kind of forensic invitation to listening, right? So there's a soundscape that, as you say, I should dwell in for a moment. I really feel like I inhabit that record when I'm listening to it. And so what that does for me, the experience of the soundscape is, it draws me in. So I'm paying attention to the texture, right? The layers, the forms of sound that are in it. And rather than what's coming next, I'm thinking about what's happening now. What is it that I'm not just hearing, but feeling? So Transversal, the whole record does that for me, but Asymptotic is, it feels magical in that sense. And
great.
for me, to referencing back to Derrida and the deconstructionists, I get a sense of destabilization, right? So the sound is destabilized as an object, right? There's
Yeah.
more than I can identify as a thing I'm listening to in that record. But at the same time, it destabilizes the boundary between us, right? So I'm not just hearing. This is the dwelling in, the inhabiting of the music. So I feel the embodied sense of being in that record as I'm listening to it. And it's
Mhm.
even more intense in headphones, right? If it's ambient in the room, that's one thing, but on headphones and sort of really living the experience, it's really a powerful record to do that. And so the passage, not just indeterminacy, but the passage of time becomes like, I don't know how long I've been here doing this. I feel it could be minutes, it could be seconds. So the experience for me, the subjectivity of that record is something I think very unfamiliar, but in a good way. I can reflect on myself in a new way because of the music that you've produced in this record. So that's the kind of thing that I think your music brings to me and always has done since the first time I heard it.
Yeah.
So enough about me, right? This solipsistic experience of my listening. What do
Mhm.
you, as a composer, as a creator, what do you want listeners of your music to do with the content that you produce, the music you produce?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the kind words. It always makes me very shy when people compliment me about my music. But I'm very happy that it resonates. No pun intended. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. That sounds really good. It is kind of what I want to achieve, if there is such a thing. So I'm quite happy if people tell me after listening to my music, like, okay, this leads me to some kind of reconsideration of what music is, or what musical experience is like, or how I perceive sounds, or whatever. So I kind of like this effect that you're like, okay, so maybe there are different kinds of music, or maybe the orchestra is not, a set of instruments, but the entire world can be an orchestra. So basically,
Mhm.
this is where we find Pierre Schaeffer, of course, making his breakthrough work, recording steam engines and whatnot, which is
Mhm.
of course fantastic. Now the entire world has become an orchestra because of the tape recorder. But to really, I mean, that's also part of what experimentation is about, to kind of look for the boundaries and stretch them, and maybe fold things into themselves, or refold them, unfold them, if you will. So I'm very happy if that really resonates with people, and perhaps there is some kind of trajectory there, perhaps. So if you look at most of my work, I think, is about inviting people to have this kind of experience. So, what is time? What is music? What is my relationship to that experience of listening to music?
Mm.
For me, it's more like an atmosphere. It's more like setting a vibe, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then inviting people in there, and inviting them to explore. Um, so yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question.
Your music feels to me very non-fictional, right? Beethoven, let's say Beethoven, or any
Yeah.
of the big romantic or Baroque composers, they're painting a world, an idealist world, right? For sure.
Hmm.
But they're painting a world that for me doesn't exist, right? It's not, Ode to Joy is great music. It can be
Hmm.
inspirational, but that if I say there's a one-to-one relationship between the world and that piece of music, I'm saying something that I don't think is true, right? It feels good. It sounds good. It's a lovely piece, but it's non-fictional in that it's fictional in that sense.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yours feels not just because there's, world sounds that you bring in, but it feels non-fictional. It feels like you are painting a world that is realer in that sense, to me than
Yeah.
sort of orchestral music. So I wonder if is that part of your goal? Do you think in those terms when you compose?
It's more about things I don't really think about when I start making music. So for me, it's not about capturing a very specific mood, or writing a song about a lover or something. I mean, I respect people that do that. It's just not what I do with music. For me, it's more about finding things I can't really express in any other way. So, and that also leads to another boundary that's worth experimenting with, if you will, which is the boundary between my sort of am I this orchestra waving his baton, or is something else going on? And of course, I am tempted to think the latter, because I am not. It's maybe a cliche, so yeah, but I'm not fully in control. It's something that happens, something that emerges, something that is often also in the creative process stretched over time. So I don't really have the same experience of certain sounds that I made a few years back, and yet I can start working again on them tomorrow. So even the creative process is durational in itself. So the experience of time becomes something more qualitative, right? Which is something you described very nicely. And that is not deliberate, only to a certain extent. So I see myself more as a kind of a producer, engineer kind of person, maybe an architect, if you will. So I set certain conditions in which things can happen. And I'm 100% okay with this. I think it's quite beautiful because it's a form of communion, right? It's communion with the creative process through music. And I feel very privileged to be part of that.
And your distribution is, are you on other platforms besides Bandcamp?
There are some odd bits here and there on Spotify. I don't really like Spotify. That's an understatement. So whenever people tell me like, okay, are you on Spotify? My immediate thought is, okay, why do you hate musicians? Because we all know the business model of Spotify is not very sustainable for the average creative person. But okay, and I respect the fact that people want to get to know my music. But then I get into this interesting conversation, like, okay, are you aware of Bandcamp? And they're like, well, not really. And then I explain to them a little bit, like, okay, so what is Bandcamp about, and what's kind of the business model there, and how does it allow you to offer physical releases apart from digital releases? And you get into this really interesting conversation about, okay, how do we distribute music? How do we appreciate that as a society, and how has technology shaped that? And these are questions that people often tend to ignore, because I think a lot of art forms have a higher reputation, if you will, than music. I think music is by most people still considered to be entertainment, but it's high art. I really agree with you there 100%. It's high art. It's perhaps the highest art form, if you would ask me, but that's of course highly subjective. But it is art, and as such, it has not really gotten the appreciation that I think it deserves, which is unfortunate. But there are, of course, a lot of interesting platforms, and now a lot of experimental music is becoming more mainstream, and people see like weird techno acts at festivals, so they're like, okay, this is interesting. So I think it's definitely improving a lot, which is fantastic. But there's still a lot of work to be done, I think. I'm not sure if I answered your question, by the way. I kind of lost track there, but
no, that was great. I really loved hearing you talk about Bandcamp. And in addition to the electronic distribution, you also release on cassettes often. And I'd love to hear you talk again about your rationale for using cassettes. It seems like there might be not quite the same resurgence as vinyl has have, but there is some return to cassettes in some instances. And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, it's a resurgence from the cassette culture that was quite active in the Netherlands and also the United States and in many other countries. But there was a time where people would distribute music through mail by sending each other cassettes. So it's kind of a riff on that. It's also partly related to the fact that distributing cassettes is a lot cheaper than distributing vinyl. If you look at the footprint, I think cassettes are worse for the environment than vinyl, if I'm not mistaken. But still, you do what you can. Being a perfectly moral person is perhaps impossible, but you do what you can. But there's definitely a resurgence of cassette because people want to have like this physical object that represents the music. So I think part of it is a reaction to having this multitude, this plethora of music available at just by snapping your fingers, you can explore many different genres, and there is maybe a sense of overload there. But it's also a nice way to support artists and to give a bit of money back. Because yes, there are people that are investing time and money into making this music, which we sometimes tend to forget. But I mean, that goes without saying. But a lot of processes of production are very far removed from how people consume them. So music is just another example of that. But I see it as a way to give something back to the community, to give people this nice object that they can play with nice artworks. I do spend a lot of time when I release a cassette myself, which I've done numerous times. I spend quite a bit of time on the artwork, improving the artwork, and really making sure that people get a nice piece of art. And then there are many people like me who release music on CD, vinyl, cassette. It's very much DIY. And people often barely break even on these releases. And yet we still persist. We keep on doing it, which I think is a thing of beauty. There's this insatiable drive, this insatiable hunger towards, let's continue. We gotta go on.
Driven by something other than earning.
Yes.
I think that seems to be also part of the ethos of the Bandcamp model, is
exactly
a place to do what you need to do, in a sense, as a musician, without necessarily caving into all the capitalist overtures. Pardon the pun.
No, I think that's great.
Cassettes also bring a certain, I don't know what to call it, Matthijs. Help me out here. A certain additional aesthetic to the listening. They have their own sound playing and the tape hiss and that sort of thing. Does that factor into your use of them?
It does. So it adds something. It can even change the point, but it adds this kind of ferric quality, kind of like this dusty quality, which has to match the music. There are things that are sometimes released on tape that could have been released on CD, preferably, but maybe that's another interesting avenue to explore, because a lot of people are now releasing music on vinyl. Vinyl is now the de facto most popular format, perhaps after digital. I'm not sure about the statistics. But for many kinds of music, CDs are much better suited. So I find that a little bit frustrating sometimes. But yeah, people seem to love their vinyl. And
so what's the frustrating part for releasing on CD?
But I don't think people do it enough. So I think CDs are kind of brushed off as this obsolete format, but that's exactly how we thought about vinyl a few decades back. So I think CDs will have their resurgence too. And I still release music on CD. It's just not something that labels tend to do. So it's something that I have to ask for sometimes. But it does sometimes better fit the music. So if the music is quite detailed, and if the qualities of tape take away too much of the details, then you might want to consider putting things out on CD. So one of the tracks that I sent you, the Irradiance track, I think is perfectly suited for CD. It's quite detailed, quite the sounds are quite crisp, quite bright. So I think CDs are much better suited for that kind of music. Yeah.
Let's talk about those tracks, Matthijs. You sent me three sections of music to use for the episode. So tell me about Irradiance. That track is, I think it's quite something.
Thank you. Yeah, back in the day, I got in touch with my friend Sietse from Moving Furniture Records. Shout out to Moving Furniture Records in Amsterdam. I think we met back in 2008 for the first time, and he was always bothering me like, okay, man, please send me a demo because I really like your music, and why don't you release something on my label? And I was working on something, but I couldn't really get it done. So it took me a long time to send him a demo. And then I did send him a demo back in 2017, maybe early 2018. And he really liked it and released it, which became my album Obscurum per Obscurius, which is still one of my all-time favorites. I spend a lot of time making it, but that was my first real serious solo release. Let's call it that, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And then through Sietse, I was able to release other music. So my collaborations with Rapad Mens, for example, and at some point, Sietse organized a compilation in which the people from the Moving Furniture roster were invited to collaborate with each other. And I was matched with Gagi Petrovic. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Gagi and I created some source material together, and each made our own take on that. So the album is actually a double CD with one of the CDs being mine and the other CD being his, which I quite like because we did very different things with the source material. And Irradiance was one of the experiments that worked out quite well, if I may say so myself. So I'm very happy with that track. Yeah,
I find it really interesting that you create a joint record essentially from the same source material drawn out in two different ways. Tell me about that process. How did you guys work together? What was the source material?
Oh, it's been a long time, so I don't really remember. I think we just went through our hard drives and collected some things we were working on then, but weren't really finished. So we shared, I think, about half an hour of source material each, more or less, and then just said, okay, this is sort of the shared vocabulary. Let's see where we can take this. And I'm not really sure how Gagi makes music. I think he uses a lot of interesting software tools, but I did a lot of work with the modular synthesizer and some plugins. I'm a big fan of the GRM suite, so the Groupe Recherche Musicale, originally founded by Pierre Schaeffer, also has a small section creating plugins for audio transformation, audio effects. And I use those a lot. And at some point, something emerges, like irradiance.
At some point, something emerges.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to unpack that, Matthijs. What's the process? What is it that happens in that emergence? There's a final output, something that you say, this is good enough to put on a record and release. But getting there seems like you put a lot of thought and time and experimentation into that. So can you draw that out for me?
Yeah, sure. A lot of it comes down to spending time in studios or creating this environment in which things come into existence. So I make different edits of the same file. I make edits of edits and then edits of edits of edits. And at some point, you've mangled the source material to such an extent that it can become difficult to recognize, which is perfectly fine, of course, if you ask me. But you can take it in so many directions, and that's also part of the struggle with electronic music. Is in terms of the creative process, I find that a little bit daunting sometimes. That you can take it in so many different directions. So you have to kind of limit yourself. But I didn't really impose any limits on myself for that record. I just started playing around with these sounds, and Gagi made some really beautiful sounds. I had some interesting sounds myself. So at some point, I started laying out these sounds in different tracks and start thinking about, okay, how could this evolve? What would be a nice narrative structure for this piece? And then Now, this leads, of course, to another question. So what kind of story are you trying to tell? I don't know. It's not something like, okay, I saw two blackbirds in a tree when I was taking a walk the other day, and it reminded me of blah, blah, blah. It's something completely different. It's much more about the sounds. It's much more about how I experience the sounds and how the sounds match with each other, and how I could use them to make a certain mood. I can't really describe that in any other way than through the music.
Is the narrative that you describe so feels to me like it's a musical narrative. The sounds, in a sense, are equivalent to words. The story that you end up with is the dwelling, the indwelling, maybe of the listener in the music, and not per se some one-to-one. I'm describing something in the world.
Yeah, so to say that sounds produce a certain mood is maybe already going too far. So for me, it's something that's a little bit beyond how we commonly describe sensations. It's more about very, very personal associations that go beyond logos, perhaps. So I can't really put it into words. That's not an attempt to avoid giving an answer. It's just I really struggle to put it into words.
Yeah, I understand.
But it's also not about that. For me, it's not about that. So for me, it's much more about, okay, where do the sounds lead themselves, or how could I create some kind of dialogue between two different elements, for example. Now, some sounds are very dense. Some sounds are more playful. Some sounds are more metaphysical. Other sounds are very much rooted. But even in the creative process, I don't think in those terms. I just listen to the sounds, if that makes sense.
I think it does. You said, in a sense, it transcends the logos, which is, I'm sorry to go here, Matthijs, but is there a spiritual or a theological aspect to what you produce?
I think so.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, as you know, I like to read, and I've been reading a lot on negative theology for the past year and a half. I'm not sure if I understand it. I'm not sure if understanding it is the point. But this whole idea of perhaps it's more about negative theology or apophaticism. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's really about describing God in theology, right? Up to the point where you notice that the language is starting to break down. So we don't really have the words to put this, to express this, to represent this, or whatever. So perhaps that's kind of the spiritual motif here. But for sure, it's about moods or feelings that point to something larger than myself. This is also captured in the process itself. So it's not just about me. It's never just about me. So hence the kind of hesitation to engage in autobiography. But still, I mean, there is something going on there. Yeah.
Apophatic makes me think of Parmenides, right? We can never, language is never commensurate with nothing or the unknown in that sense.
Yeah.
If there's anything beyond the something that we experience in this world, we have no capacity to understand it or describe it in that sense.
Yeah.
So that feels very, I don't know, honest to me in a sense.
Yeah, and also shout out to all the Dennis Turner fans out there. Darkness of God is a fantastic book about apophaticism, and perhaps it's about that, about this sort of luminous darkness, if you will. So at some point we encounter a situation where we can't really put it into words anymore, but that's perfectly fine because something else can shine through, although we could never probably really articulate it too well. But there are maybe ways to relate ourselves to it.
Music being first among those.
Well, if you ask me, yes. Yeah, yes.
Exactly.
But it can be done in other ways, perhaps. Yeah, sure. Why not? Drawing or painting, or that doesn't really matter. But for me, the vehicle is really music. Always has been. Yeah.
Maybe in a sense, it's creativity. This is what brings us closest to, I think, all of the rest of the world, and whatever lies beyond the world. Right? I think our creativity is the stretch of our imagination and what's
Yep.
possible.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit more about the tracks that you sent over, Matthijs.
Yeah.
We'll put them in I'll drop one in the center of this. Tell me about the piece that you want to come into the center. And I think it's something in the middle of a piece that you sent previously. Is that correct? Tell me more about
Correct.
that.
Yeah, correct. So I sent you a track from a tape that I did for Important Drone Records, a label curated by a Polish gentleman in Spain, who I chatted with quite a bit back in the COVID days. I'm not sure how he's doing, but a really lovely guy who ran this label, Important Drone Records, which is kind of a joke because there is also a label called Important Records, which is indeed releasing quite important music, I would say. But he was kind of making a joke on that, and by saying, okay, there's also important drone music that's also that also deserves some of our precious time and attention. And basically, I just sent him an email like, okay, I really like your label. I really like what you're doing. He did like these very limited edition cassettes, 30 copies of each release, no represses. So it's like, okay, who is this guy? I really have to get to know him. And I just sent him a message, and he was very friendly, and we started chatting about philosophy of language and music and whatnot. And at some point, I sent him a demo, and the demo was inspired by the work of Gilbert Simondon, who is a French philosopher of technology, amongst other things. Passed away back in 1989, I believe. But pretty much a contemporary of Gilles Deleuze, who's another philosopher I've enjoyed quite a bit through my career. And Simondon talks about this notion of metastability. Let me just pull up the Bandcamp page so I can give you the correct quote, because the album is titled Metastabilities, so not metastability, but metastabilities, plural.
So while Matthijs pulls up this page, let's spend a few uninterrupted minutes with his music. Listen for movement inside stillness, and listen for texture, and listen for the way time itself begins to soften. Metastability 3 by Matthijs Kouw. One of the things I love about his work is that it changes the pace of attention itself. When I listen to the music that he produces, I find that I stop waiting for things to happen, and I begin listening a lot more deeply to what's already there. Let's pick back up with Matthijs and our conversation on sound as philosophy, the spiritual dimensions of experimental music, and music that can change your perception of space and time.
Metastability can be defined as a stable state of a dynamic system other than its state of least energy. Systems in a metastable state are charged with potentials. And all of the pieces are of an equal length, so they're all 22.5 minutes, which tries to make the point that, okay, there's no beginning, no end. We are basically like a snapshot of a complex system. We are studying that system for this duration. And the pieces are all an attempt to kind of have this mood of a system trying to work out its different configurations, its different potentialities. So sometimes there are things that emerge very briefly and then disappear, all against the backdrop of a pretty sustained tone. But on top of that, there's all this stuff happening, and even the foundational layer is shifting a little bit at some point. So it's my take on Simondon, perhaps a bit of systems theory in the form of music. And looking back at that, so I made these pieces about 6 years ago, just before the pandemic started. It was kind of a way to grapple with philosophical concepts in the form of musical composition. And I quite like the no beginning, no end angle. So it's like it's just this frame, this snapshot of something more dynamic. So you mentioned exploring the relationship between movement and stasis. I think that really emerges quite well in these pieces.
I don't want to. So it's very now to talk about quantum things, but the description of a complex system with no beginning and no end feels like there's a quantum sense in there. I take out of it something different than you take out of it, because whatever we quote unquote observe in the moment is different for each one of us. So I'm wondering if there's not to be banal about that, but is there a kind of sense of that in the observer issue?
Yeah, a little bit. So there are different ways you can experience the music, and for me, as stated before, right? So even if I revisit some of the pieces myself, I find something new, and I often get the response from people like, "Okay, I find something new every time," which I think is fantastic. So it's about, if you look at this space that you could dwell in, you can do different. You can walk, an infinite amount of routes through the same architecture, through the same building. So I quite like that people walk away with that, and there's also this kind of unanimous experience that people have. Like, okay, I hear more people giving me the same description, so I think that's quite nice. But of course, the observer comes into the experience, and it almost goes without saying. So how you come into the piece with the expectations that you have is kind of a no-brainer, but also in the experience itself, the density of the music is sometimes quite high. So there are different paths, different trajectories you can follow.
I think experimental music and drone music especially are unfamiliar for a lot of people. This is not a go-to category for a lot of musical folks. So I wonder if you can, hypothetically, you're on the street, you meet somebody who doesn't really know or like experimental music, or they think they don't. What's the conversation? How do you bring them in to say, give it a try?
That's a great question. So for me, if I listen to this kind of music, it does give me this sense of communion. So I think we kind of, we set off this sort of spiritual trajectory in our conversation, and for me that makes a lot of sense. So how can you spend some time with this music, with this sound? I think that's maybe the best way to put it. So it's kind of meditative without, you're not sitting on a cushion or whatever. You're not counting. You're not focusing on the tip of your nose, for example. But it is very meditative in the best sense of the word. So how would I incentivize a person? How would you like to spend some time with music that can reconfigure what you think about yourself, about music, and about space and time? That could be my pitch, perhaps. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect pitch, in fact.
No.
And bring it home a little bit, Matthijs. The third piece that you sent that we'll use to close the podcast interview. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, that's from the transversal tape. Not the penultimate piece, but I think track 4. It's just one of the more recent things I've been doing, which is kind of similar to stuff that I worked on at the time of metastabilities, for example. But I think it's a nice, nice nod to where I'm taking things now. I am working on something new. I just got in touch with Thomas Rosen from the Ruhrgebiet, the Ruhr area within Western Germany, which is actually quite close to me. So I can meet Thomas after like an hour, spending an hour on the Autobahn. So he lives quite close by, and we made some recordings back in February, which I'm now processing and starting to get into shape. So it's starting to crystallize, if you will, in the form of a new album. And then there's also some new solo material that I'm very slowly finishing. So it's going quite well. But yeah, it will be kind of adjacent to the transversal track. Yeah.
Is there a field component to your work, Matthijs? Do you record nature, record industrial sounds, record the environment? What does that look like for you?
I do, although not that much, but I do record sounds. Living in the Netherlands, it's quite hard to find a clean recording, or to make a clean recording of something happening in nature, which is fine. But what I usually end up doing is working with contact microphones or recording objects. So a way to avoid all the traffic noise or planes flying overhead is by using contact microphones, because then you just catch the vibrations of objects. And also I do a lot of recordings of objects in the studio. But field recording is another fantastic discipline that I've not really dipped my toe in yet. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'm not sure. But there are amazing artists out there, like this Japanese gentleman, Toshiya Tsunoda, who makes recordings of harbors or reverbing plates. It's the most beautiful music you've ever heard. It's fantastic. And it's just just like a person with a microphone standing in the harbor recording things. Maybe he's doing a little bit of processing. I'm not sure, but it's fantastic. And there are also people like what's his name again? Marc Namblar, who is I think he is a forester, or he's doing like nature protection. And he made this beautiful CD with I believe with his brother, which is just nature sounds, like recordings of small rivers and branches creaking in the wind and things like that. It's absolutely stunning. Yeah.
That sounds good. Nice. Yep. Good to listen to. I'm thinking about my studio it's just a room in my house, which I've kind of arranged to be a little bit like a studio. It doesn't have soundproofing. It barely has acoustic dampening, but neighbors on all sides. And I'm thinking about what you just said, hard to get a clean recording of something natural in the case you were talking about, but it's hard to get a clean recording of a conversation in this point because cars, dogs, cats, people coughing on the sidewalk, all kinds of sound gets in here.
Yeah.
And for the podcast, part of my, I've had a couple of episodes that I recorded on Zoom just because. And Zoom compresses audio. There's a whole different sort of relationship with audio between this platform that I use, Riverside now, and Zoom. And so cleaning up Zoom content is much different than cleaning up Riverside content.
Mm-hmm.
And I notice how hard it is to get clean audio, even just trying to have a conversation. Now I can, and outside, I did an Instagram reel of my apple tree, right? Because I planted it last year. It's growing nicely. It's blooming and that sort of thing. And I just wanted to show that. And it was all lawnmower noise. Right? It's just like, how do you get at a harbor or in the outdoors or anywhere clean audio recording of just natural sounds? Can such a thing actually exist? I think is where my head goes to.
Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the soundscape is populated by beautiful birdsong and leaf blowers simultaneously. It reminds me of I do the occasional DJ sets here in close to where I live in the Waaghals record store in Nijmegen, which is one of the better record stores in the Netherlands, if you ask me. Like friendly folks, good collection, perfect for crate digging. There's a lot of secondhand vinyl as well, and occasionally I do a little bit of DJing there. And they asked me to do like this soundscape, ambient soundscape set a few weeks ago. Which was nice because I did, the kind of relaxing, kind of soothing sounds that people associate with ambient music, but also kind of harsher field recordings of, for example, I used this, or I played this CD from Alan Lamb, who sadly passed away recently, who would record these old telegraph wires in the Australian desert with, I believe, contact microphones or something similar. But it's quite noisy, but that's also a soundscape, right? That's also part of our ambient, the sounds that surround us. So yeah, it doesn't always have to be a soothing, pleasant experience. It's also about embracing sound in its full width. Maybe we don't have to aestheticize it that much all the time.
Or assume that some things, leaf blowers, are noise and birdsong is something, as you say, more aesthetic than that.
Yeah,
we're trained to exclude the noise, what we understand to be noise, from the appropriate soundscape or the soundscape that I want, perhaps. So yeah, that's a good point, Matthijs. I like that. Which is not to say I want more leaf blowers.
No. I hate leaf blowers. Yeah. You can just leave the leaves on the ground. It's no problem.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. It's good mass for the animals. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Doing this music live, is that when you're performing a DJ set, is it from CD? Do you use cassettes? Do you use LPs? Is it computer generated? How do you actually present a live performance of this?
Yeah, when I DJ, I try to do it as many channels as possible at the same time. So I would usually I have like 2 record players, 2 CD players, and I try to do 2, 3, hopefully 4 layers at the same time. Usually that's kind of my approach. So it often works quite well, if I may say so myself, but it's a little bit uncontrollable, which keeps it fun. But that's just the DJ part. For the live performance, I tend to use a laptop in combination with something else. So I've been doing a lot of kind of hybrid setups with the laptop and the modular synthesizer, which is a nice compact kit to carry around. So I have like a suitcase that contains my modular and then a backpack with my laptop and some cables maybe. And that's it. So that's quite portable. And there's always a live element. It's not completely live. I am very much unashamedly a studio musician, so I can't really make something up on the fly. So some elements are live, but there's always a pre-recorded element to it. So I tend to mix tracks live on the laptop, do live effects, so live small edits within certain parameters, and then use the modular to improvise on top of that. But I don't really play a lot live these days. I am becoming more and more of a studio musician, just quietly producing, releasing music. For
Do you
me,
use
that's
analog at all? Tapes, a reel-to-reel, any of that kind of?
not really. No, I have a tape recorder, but I just use it to play back music. I have some analog gear in the form of instruments. So I have some analog synths and some of the modules on the modular are also analog.
What's your modular? Is it a Korg or what?
I used to own a little bit of Korg, but sold it and then dipped my toe a little bit in Buchla. So I played around with the Buchla music easel. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, which is a lot of fun, but I primarily use Eurorack. So, which is a modular standard from Germany that is now led to this huge resurgence of modular since back in I believe the Aughties or maybe the 2010s. And a lot of people are now doing a lot of work with modulars. Sometimes it does get a little bit ridiculous. So people are basically making 4 to the floor techno on a 40,000 euro setup. Not that there's anything wrong with that music, but it's just like, okay, now the instruments are becoming kind of a gimmick in itself. And I really don't like that. I think it's a little bit elitist. I think musical experimentation should be available to as many people as possible. And by making this statement like, okay, you're really cool if you have this huge wall of synthesizers in front of you, for me, that really misses the point. So for me, it's really not about that. It's, I don't know, maybe it's a symbol of the penis. Maybe we can get a bit Freudian here, but it's not, for me, it's not what it's about. I understand the appeal, but I'm rather, the kind of performer that's hidden away in a corner somewhere and letting the music speak for itself. But I mean, that's just my approach.
Is there a found component to your music, or do you set out to create your source material deliberately?
Yeah, I always carry some kind of recording device. So I tend to capture sounds if I hear them. So yes, yeah, sure.
Nice.
But usually these sounds are quite mangled, so they end up somewhere in the composition, but barely recognizable, if at all.
I can't wait to listen to more of your stuff, Matthijs. There's albums that I haven't heard yet, so I look forward to going back through your catalog and
fantastic
reacquainting. So we've gone a little over an hour now, and I want to say thanks so much for your time today, Matthijs. This has been great. Really fabulous conversation. I love talking with you. And
thank you, sir.
As a closeout, anything you'd like to leave people with?
Yes, first of all, delete your Spotify account right now. Just cancel your subscription, get it over with, and start buying music from real people. And a big thanks to you. It was really great catching up. We didn't talk for a couple of years before we had our phone call a few weeks ago that led to this conversation. So I'm really happy to make your acquaintance again. So that's fantastic. It's been a gift. It's been a really nice hour. It flew by for me. I really had a good time talking about music. And if you want to know more, I guess I can leave my website, my Bandcamp in the show notes for people to check out my music. And keep exploring, keep listening, and keep exploring the outer boundaries.
Again, thanks, Matthijs. Great to catch up. I'm glad we've reconnected after all these years, and You're the first guest that I've talked to that actually brought up Derrida and Deleuze. So thank you for that.
I couldn't resist.
I remember not long ago, which is nice.
Thank you, sir. It's been a huge pleasure and an honor. So thank you again.
I'm so right, but thank you. Take care, Matthijs. We'll talk again.
Yes, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.
piece is called Asymptotic, another exceptional bit of music from Matthijs Kouw. My thanks again to Matthijs for joining me today for such an excellent conversation. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between hearing and listening. I think for me, hearing is more or less automatic, and listening is intentional. And I think music like Matthijs's asks us to do something increasingly rare, and that is give patience, give attention, give presence, and be intentional. So not simply consuming sound, but inhabiting sound and letting it inhabit us. So maybe in the process, we can rediscover what music is and what it is not. It's not just entertainment, it is a way of knowing. If you'd like to explore Matthijs's work further, including the recordings featured in this episode, you can find links in the show notes, along with all kinds of links to folks that we talked about in the conversation today. Thank you for turning us on. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe, shared the episode, or simply told somebody who loves adventurous music and deep listening. I'm Scott Cady, and this is the Sum of All Wisdom. Until next time, keep listening, keep exploring, and keep searching for the sounds that change the way you hear the world.